Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend in the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we have a very special guest, Eric from, right now he's from Jerusalem, also lives in Tel Aviv. Eric Sirkin, friend of Denny Weinberg's that we've had Denny on and sharing with us truth from Israel. And his source is Eric, who lives over there, and we're privileged to know the truth of what's going on. And we're going to explore that more today with Eric. But Eric, welcome. It's good to have you, and we're excited that you're able to join us. We were just sharing a little bit, and we wanted to get this on tape and on the podcast, Eric's background. So, Eric, just again. Briefly tell us, how you met Denny, and then we were just getting to the point of your going to Berkeley, and by the way, I think you said you're a dual citizen, so you're a citizen of Israel and of America.
Yes, I am a citizen of both the United States and Israel, and that entitles me to the privilege of paying taxes in both countries.
Yeah. We do know one thing, that the United States, if you're making money anywhere in the world, they're going to get it.
Yeah, this is something that happened. I got enforceable during the Obama administration, and it's perhaps right. But whatever. I'm not going to argue about that.
Yep.
On a different subject. So, going back. Denny Weinberg and I have known each other since probably about 1957, I would say. We were both in kindergarten together, and then went all the way through high school and finished high school together in 1970. He went off to the school in Missouri, and I went off to do my undergraduate work at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, majoring in chemistry. I also went there with Naval ROTC, in the Naval ROTC program. This was, as you may recall, the period of the Vietnam War, and I thought if I was going to serve in Vietnam, I wanted to do it with the Navy. After 2 years, I was able to guarantee you walking around campus at the University of Wisconsin in 1970 was a challenge.
I bet.
At that time. So in any case, after 2 years, I informed the Navy that I wanted to go to graduate school, and they said it wouldn't be possible. So we mutually agreed that I would exit the program. In any case, I finished a bit early for my program at the University of Wisconsin. And then in late 1973, I went off to do my graduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, in the field of chemical physics. And during the course of that period, I lived in a place called International House, which was a residence on the campus that housed many foreign students, as well as graduate students. And that experience, and if you recall, this was now 1973, right after the 1973 war. We were all waiting, all those of us that had cars were waiting in long lines to get the fuel. And it was a very difficult period for many parts of the world, in particular Israel. And things started happening on campus. I arrived, of course, intending just to focus on my degree, and a lot of the types of activities you see happening today on university campuses across the United States in the aftermath of October 7th, I was seeing unfold at UC Berkeley in the 70s, and I couldn't sit still. Quite honestly, growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, I'm not sure if Denny had the same experience as me, but probably did. We heard about anti-Semitism from our parents. Things like they couldn't go certain places, there were certain restaurants they couldn't go to, and things like this. But for my generation, it was a foreign idea. We didn't really experience much of anything growing up. But when I got to the University of California campus, it hit me like a hammer over the head. And I realized that there were actually people in this world that had they had a gun or a knife, there's a good chance I would be dead,
Mm.
just because of the fact I was Jewish. And that was like a real awakening for me. I finished my oral exams, and which meant I could then just focus on my research for the PhD program, and that allowed me a lot of time. I, together with some friends I made on campus, mostly Jewish, we started organizing on campus to advocate on behalf of Israel. And that was the beginning of a real change in direction in my life, my career, and everything. I was trained to be an academic at the University of California by the best chemistry department in the world, probably still is. And that was my path. But all these activities on campus changed my path. I finished my degree about 4 years later and went off and did 2 years what they call postdoctorate work in Israel at the Hebrew University, which academically wasn't necessarily the best place for me to go, but it was something relevant and important to me at that stage of my life to experience life here, and I did that. And I was here between years 1979 and 1980. And I finished, and then I went to take a role in Palo Alto, California, in Silicon Valley, returning back to the Bay Area. And I was very fortunate to have gotten a job offer from Xerox's famous Palo Alto Research Center, which hopefully most of your listeners know is really the key place where many, many, many of the technologies we know today associated with computing, smartphones, internet, networking, a lot of those technologies were invented at Xerox. And I had a chance to really interact with a lot of important people at the time. So maybe I should stop here. Denny, you're here.
There we go.
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Denny.
Hi, Denny.
Eric was sharing his story and how you guys met, and then him going to Berkeley and experiencing anti-Semitism and going to Israel, and then you came back, worked in Palo Alto. Eric, after you worked there, where did your career go from there?
Well, I remained in Silicon Valley for most of my life, I would say, more than anywhere else. And I went off to my first startup after 4 years at Xerox in the semiconductor industry. And then after that, I took a position for 2 years working in the printing industry, color printing at the time, and which was just becoming something unique. It was soon after the Macintosh. I was at Xerox when the Macintosh was introduced by Apple, and that was a big thing because most of those technologies you saw on the Mac were actually developed at Xerox's research center while I was there. And then I got a job at Apple. The inventor of the laser printer, a guy named Gary Starkweather, also a PhD, was not my office mate, but he had an office like 4 doors down from mine at Xerox. And when soon after I left, he asked me if I'd come work in his organization at Apple, which I did. And that was my beginning of a long career at Apple, which ended in 1997. I was a senior director at Apple and had a lot of exposure. Many, many dear friends still from that period. But that was, it was time for me to leave. And then I went to an internet company, one of the very first ones. It was the first one you could book internet travel on before Expedia or Travelocity even existed.
Wow.
And we focused on the corporate market. So I was asked by the VCs. I got a reputation in Silicon Valley as the guy to call if you had problems with your engineering organization in a startup. I would help turn it around and get it pointed in the right direction. So I was still steeped in technology. And I did that, had a great time. We took the company public and then sold it in 2000. It was after the crash.
Yep.
And I had to hang around for a year and a half, and I did. And And I did some other things in Silicon Valley, consulted here or there, but nothing really of notable consequence at that stage. And over the next few years, I eventually made my way to Israel in 2010,
Yeah.
and I've been here since.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit what drove you to want to go back to Israel and just a little bit of the heart behind that? I think there's a
Sure. When I lived here in 2000, well, certainly all the events at Berkeley have impacted me in a very, very strong way. It caused me to spend almost every spare minute of my time outside doing research in the laboratory for my PhD program. I would read history, not just not just Jewish history, not just American history, but you name it, I was reading it, and it gave me a very strong perspective on my Jewish faith and on Israel and on how how Israel fit within the world context, if you will, and all that reading and the thinking and advocating for Israel on the campus really formed a bond between me. And then I spent 2 years here, as I said, doing a postdoc, and I enjoyed my time here. But getting a position in my field at that time was not easy. It's part of the reason I changed fields. And then after being in the United States, after maybe in Palo Alto, I don't know, maybe 9, 10 years, I had actually a job offered on the School of Applied Physics at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. But my wife at the time, my first wife, we met in Israel, didn't want to go back. So we already had 2 children and one on the way. So my future was to stay there. And I did that, and I always had in the back of my mind that I always wanted to come back. And after a divorce process that finished in 2005, I remained in the area because I had one child still in high school. And once she finished, I felt I was a free agent, and it was time for me to come back. And so I came back, and I remarried here to another American woman from the Pittsburgh community. And I live in her home most of my time here in Jerusalem. She has 4 children. All the children served in the army at one role or another. One in combat role, 2 of them intelligence units, and one in sort of the Air Force in like a support role. And so my life has taken several twists and turns. But I have to say, I even now, even with all this chaos that's going on around us, I enjoy my life here very much. And as Denny knows, I come back to California about once a year, trying to make that now twice a year because I have 3 daughters and 2 grandsons on the West Coast. And I often want to come visit with them. And when I'm in LA, I try to spend time and see Denny and catch up.
That's beautiful.
So, and so I enjoy my life here very much.
Yep, that's beautiful. Denny, you want to just add anything about your relationship with Eric at all that we can as we get going here? You're muted, Denny. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt with the voice here. Eric and I got reconnected after not really having been in touch with each other since we were little kids. But the funny thing about the little Jewish community he probably talked about that we grew up in, it was it was very small and very tight. So the relationships that we have with our schoolmates, Eric knows this, those all the way back to first grade, kindergarten, second, third. These are deep bonded relationships, even if we haven't seen. He sees them more than I do. Because he just made that a point, but we have these relationships that are very deep from that, and it's part of maybe the kind of community we grew up in. But I was very curious. I think he reached out, said he was going to be in LA. We met, and I was as you know, I was intrigued by his life moves, and so we've stayed in touch really because of both things. And here most recently, as things have really become troubling for Jews in America, it formed a reason for us to talk, but it also rekindled a very, very old young relationship.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So sweet.
Well, Eric, thank you for sharing all that. It's very helpful for us to understand, your heart and what's going on with you, particularly as you help us understand it. One of our questions, obviously, that we have, we get limited perspective. We know certain things are happening, but we don't really know what is happening from Israel. The first question is really around the current status of the Gaza war with Hamas. And then we know that we heard that Fatah and Hamas were going to get together and come up with some a new government for the West Bank and Gaza. I've heard all kinds of stories about that on all sides of it. So we'd love to hear your perspective. And Denny, you can certainly weigh in here on basically what is the current status of the war in the Gaza with Hamas.
Okay, so I should preface this by saying what I know from reading the Israeli Hebrew press, the Israeli English press, and there's this phenomenon in Israel called lone soldiers. It's a digression, so I don't want to go into too deeply. It'll take too long to describe, but I have I think best to call him a nephew from St. Louis, who came and served in the IDF, and he was in Khan Yunis up until like a week ago. And I have the son of a dear friend of mine from Palo Alto days, who just went in. And he was I think he's still in Khan Yunis. He's getting off on Sunday. So I catch up with these guys as they get leave, and I hear from their stories. Some of it they can tell me, some of it they can't. So here's kind of what my impression of the situation. And if you don't mind, I'm going to describe a little bit about the situation in Judea and Samaria, or what's called the West Bank, because it's relevant. So today, and even before the war broke on October 7th, the IDF has forces, very elite forces, that will often go into areas in Judea and Samaria based upon intelligence. So intelligence reports come in that in this home, in this town, there is if you lift up the bed in this bedroom, you're going to see a store of rocket propelled grenades. And so this unit it sounds crazy, but I've talked with guys in this unit. It's called Duv Duvan. They go in, knock on the door or pound on the door at 4 o'clock in the morning. Some sleepy Arab family opens the door. These soldiers rush in, and they go into this room, and they find exactly what they told they're going to find. I've talked with guys who served in this unit, Duv Duvan. I said, don't you ever lose sleep at night? Because what you're doing is you're really disrupting people's lives in the middle of the night. And every time they say nope, because 99.999% of the time, we find exactly what we're told we're going to find. We're going to find where they told us we're going to find it. So, preface with that, meaning that operations are going on a regular basis. I think most of the Israeli public foresees one element of the end game of what's going on in Gaza, or the day after, as they call it, is this will be now implemented in Gaza. Since Israel evacuated Gaza in 2005 under the orders of Arik Sharon, who was prime minister at the time, until October 7th, Israel really, except for maybe 2 occasions, never really sent in troops. Okay, they were left alone. We would inspect materials going in through our borders by aid to them to make sure there wasn't arms or things they could use for making arms. But unfortunately, there were these tunnels bridging between Egypt and Gaza, and the Egyptian army would look the other way, generally getting bribed in the process, allowing all kinds of materials to go illegally into Gaza that eventually Hamas used effectively to rocket attacks and attacks on October 7th. So we foresaw that this was going to go on. And between the war raging on with 1,000 or 2,000 troops in a given city in Gaza, there's a slow process of, I guess, of a decline in intensity in operations in Gaza that we're in the process on the down ramp of, if you understand what I'm trying to say. In other words, we do send in troops now, and we'll send in maybe a few hundred at a time, maybe as many as 1,000 into an area. I think they're going back into Khan Yunis now. And that's based upon intelligence that we received on launching of rockets. We'll go in, the troops will check for tunnels, looking for operations centers. In so doing, of course, they engage with Hamas combatants, who they often try to kill or take captive. And they just try to destroy the infrastructure in the process. As they're destroying this infrastructure, there become fewer and fewer places for the Hamas combatants and their commanders, all the way up the chain of command, to take refuge. And it was because of these kinds of operations that about 2 weeks ago, the IDF was able to find and capture, actually kill, Mohammed Def, who was on their most wanted list for many, many years, because he no longer had places underground to meet with his chief lieutenants. He had to come above ground. And as soon as he did, they took him out. And it's my expectation, and that I think of many Israelis, that there will be a day in the foreseeable future where Yahya Sinwar will do the exact same thing. He will have to come above ground. And when he does, he'll take him. And so there's a gentle, slow declining in combat activity taking place in Gaza. And eventually it'll reach some form of a steady state. Something perhaps like what we're used to in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. That being said, it's the intent. Now, of course, there are negotiations and ceasefires underway, and I'm not privy to the dynamics of the negotiations, but it's the impression of most Israelis that in any scenario, when the ceasefire takes place, Israel will be in control of what's called the Rafah corridor, or sometimes called the Philadelphia corridor. And that's the border area inside Gaza that's within about a 3-kilometer distance from the Egyptian border. And the reason why Israel feels it's critical that they maintain that is in order to try and prevent any smuggling of arms across that border from Egypt. No matter what Egypt says or what the Egyptian government says, this has been a major source of income for the country of Egypt because they get paid. So Hamas gets all this aid money, okay, from all over the world. And some of it comes through the Palestinian Authority, some of it comes through their illegal operations and money laundering operations. And they have a considerable amount of money by now, taxing the everything that all the commerce that takes place in Gaza. And they bribe the Egyptian soldiers to enable them to smuggle in arms and smuggle in materials that can be used to make arms. And Israel is going to do whatever it can to stop that in the future. And that means, from our view, having men on the ground, women also, on the ground along that border corridor.
Yeah.
And Israel's also carved out about a 1-kilometer perimeter around Gaza, because one of the problems is that the combatants would come together with the civilians right up to the border fence. And it allowed them also to launch, before October 7th, it was very common that they would launch helium-filled balloons, attach a fire to it, and then the winds, or westerly winds, they carry the balloons across the border into fields, Israeli fields of produce, grain, whatever, and setting it on fire. And so having this 1-kilometer perimeter of what you can call no man's land is intended to prevent that. So, of course, there are negotiations going on, and at least maybe they're stalled right now, but they were going on. Most parties feel they're quite close. It's not, I really don't know. There are various rumors as to what this agreement is going to look like in terms of what Israel will or will not be able to do. during parts of its phases as well as at the end of it.
Is the go ahead, Denny.
Eric, I was going to ask you the question about how intelligence is so effective. One of the things you've told me is that because none of the news agencies, the normal news agencies around the world, are embedded in Gaza, and maybe the reasons for that there's a very strange way that news, comes to the outside world and makes it very suspect.
So you asked about two things, I think. One was intelligence, and that to me is how does the IDF gather its intelligence? And if you let me address that one second, let me deal with what I thought you asked in the first one, which is how is news gathered in Gaza and how is it reported and what's that whole process? So let me try to describe it. Israel/Jerusalem are probably, for any international correspondent, for any news outlet, whether it be a major newspaper, BBC, New York Times, or Associated Press or Reuters, whatever. There's one in France called AFP. I forget the French acronym for it. This is the choicest location for every single reporter. This is where everybody wants to be. It's because there's always something going on each and every day. For whatever reason, everyone in the world wants to know what's going on here because there's always something going on. And most of these reporters that you see on CNN or whatever, they live in Jerusalem. And life in Jerusalem is not bad. There's this hotel called the American Colony Hotel, and most of the reporters hang out at the bar. They talk to each other over a scotch, and then they go home, they write their story, they report it, and if there's something really going on, they'll go stand out on some, what's the English word, porch, or something overseeing the city of Jerusalem.
A little veranda.
Balcony, yep.
Yeah, and they'll be videotaped, and that will be what's broadcast. But the actual gathering of the news that you see, the videos of what's going on in Gaza, are done by what you call stringers. These are people, contractors, hired by these news agencies. Maybe some of them are full-time employees. I don't think so. Most of them are on contract. They'll be given press vests and cameras, and they're all Arab. And if you're an Arab, let's even say you really start out by wanting to do your best to report objectively what's really going on. Okay, so you've got a family. Okay, maybe you're married, you've got a wife. Maybe you're married, you have a husband. Maybe you've got parents. And if you report the wrong things or say the wrong things and it's broadcast internationally, then Hamas knows, and they're going to knock on your door one night, and they're going to say, "You do that again, guess what's going to happen?" And so either you believe and you're a member of Hamas, or you're intimidated by them, and you report on what they want you to see. So everything you're seeing coming out of Gaza is what Hamas wants you to see.
Wow.
If there's anything they don't want you to see, you will not see it. And let me give you a great example. During the second Intifada, there was a case where two Israelis in the car, men, accidentally drove into Ramallah, which is sort of the pseudo capital of the Palestinian Authority. It's about 20 kilometers north of Jerusalem. It's in what's called the Area A, which is under the governance of the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian police that are administering and holding security there.
And that would be, by the way, that would be called the West Bank, right?
Yes, that would be called the West Bank. So, so these guys entered by car by mistake, and it happens. It's happened a few times. Under normal circumstances, the Palestinian Authority police will generally find them quickly and hold them and capture them. Not to do something necessarily nefarious, but to do to basically keep them from people who do want to kill them until eventually they're let out or something's negotiated. But in this case, police arrested them, and the police station was just invaded by a mob. I don't know if the police let them in or the mob just overcame them. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone knows. So they did this, and the mob went in and they literally knifed these two men and hacked them to death. And there's a picture of a Palestinian guy, maybe early 20s, late teens, standing in this window, holding up his hands with blood on them, excited to and telling the mob, basically, we killed the Jews, we killed the Jews. Now, this was an Italian reporter who photographed that and distributed it over all the international news networks. The next day, this guy was told by the Palestinian Authority that he better leave, because if not, they could not protect him. And the next day, he and his wife could be dead. And so they left. Now, I don't know whether that was a threat or whatever, but that's just the way the reporting goes on here. So you cannot, you've got a very asymmetric situation. Israel is a pluralistic democracy, got a lot of challenges internally, and and how we define our democracy, but it is, and the press is very free. And despite what you might hear from the other reporters, people report here all kinds of things. Okay, and so we are not able to go in and threaten people when they report things that we don't like. Okay, which is 90% of the time. Okay, so instead, you have the situation where if you're reporting in either, I'll call it the West Bank or Gaza, you have to report what these people want you to report. Otherwise, if your family's not threatened or you're not threatened, you're told, well, we're not going to let you report any more stories from here. If you can't report stories from these locations, then Associated Press or Reuters are going to reassign you someplace else and bring somebody else in who can get those stories, because they're out competing for these stories. So this is why you see what you see and hear what you hear. And every time, people listening to me, when you're watching CNN or Fox or whatever, just think to yourself, I'm seeing what Hamas wants me to see.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Interesting enough, was over in Europe watching CNN, and I kind of knew this because Denny had shared it with us. But there was a story that Israel was stopping all aid into Gaza, and they showed a truck, and they showed pictures, and I knew, well, that's completely false. But it's what what they wanted us to hear, so we see it. Well, thank you, Eric, for introducing us into this understanding of it, which is why we're so privileged, Denny, to have you and then your Eric connected, so that we could start getting real information from it. So we want to have you join us for next week, and we'll start talking further about the question of, well, how does Israel get their intelligence, and then get into some of these other issues. So, Eric, thank you so much. It's been very helpful and very informative. And everybody, we just hope that you enjoy getting real information. And Denny and Eric will continue to help us interpret what's going on. So, thank you very much, and we will check with you next time. And Kathy, we'll come back for part 2.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. If you have questions about today's podcast, send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.